Mike, thanks for that warm introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to y'all today about some of our past experiences in Alabama on the wildlife management area system. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the WMA system in Alabama to begin with. We have about 750,000 acres currently that's in the WMA system, scattered from the Tennessee line to the Gulf. We don't own all of it. The Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries Division owns. We've closed on some stuff since I gave you those notes, but we currently own about 105,000 acres now in the division. And the Forever Wild Land Trust that started in 1992 owns about 200,000 acres that's in the WMA system. They own more than that, but there's around 200 that's in the WMAs. That's where the focus of my talk is going to be today. Our division had acquired a lot of industrial timberland in North Alabama from the mid-1970s into the 2000s, and we still add some tracts today. But much of that land had been converted to loblolly plantations, and I have to say I'm envious of a lot of the folks in here from Arkansas and the gentleman from New Jersey that have some of those nice mature stands to work with. We've got those in Alabama. The Forest Service has a lot, but we don't have that on our state-owned properties. Some of those lands that we've bought in the past have been had timber reservations on them. Some did not. Some were clear-cut when we got them. But our first foray into shortleaf planting was on the Skyline WMA, which is in Jackson County. It's on the south end of the Cumberland Plateau, and that's where this stand is. The history on this stand, it was tornado salvage in 1996, and at that same time we were thinning loblolly stands adjacent to where this had happened, and myself and Jim Shrinkle, the area biologist at the time, when we finished up the salvage and finished up the thinning, we were just ecstatic and proud of what we had, because we realized what good wildlife habitat that would be with continued management. A few months later, winter ice storm came through, and it sheared that loblolly stand that we had thinned. It totally ravaged it. And at that point, I started trying to think. I said, I'm gonna have to find something else, because I grew up in North Alabama, and ice storms are not as frequent as some of the people north of there get, but we do get them, and they are damaging to timber, and loblolly that far north in the range is very susceptible to it, especially after a first thinning. But we looked and decided that we were going to try and take that tornado salvage area and go ahead and put it into shortleaf pine. That area biologist on Skyline, I think Tim Albritton spoke about him the other day. He's actually owns property adjacent to the management area, and he decided that he would plant shortleaf on his from seeing some of the successes we had on the WMA. This tract here, we had a chemical site prep, consisted of some imazapyr and glyphosate, followed up with a prescribed burn. This stand, the photos were taken in August. This stand is roughly 17 years old now. But the seedlings were a large issue back in those days, especially in Alabama. And it's still an issue now on getting good quality seedlings. Some of the states to the north of us, Tennessee and Kentucky, produced bare root seedlings, but they would not sell out of state until they'd filled all their state orders. We ended up having a year layout there, but I ended up having a friend of mine at White City Nursery that used to work for Kimberly Clark at Coosa Pines. He sourced me some Arkansas seed source, and I had a nursery that we'd used back when I was with the Forestry Commission that grew a lot of hardwood forest for Arbor Day stuff, but it was at Wallace State Community College. They grew some container, and it was a shallow container, shortleaf forest. I guess about halfway into that, the nursery manager called me and he goes, "Man, there's something wrong with these seeds that you sent me. And I was like, what is it? And he goes, you need to ride up here and look at them. He goes, strangest thing I've ever seen. Well, I rode up, another forester that I knew that also had some of the same order of that shortleaf rode up with me. And the plugs were about yay deep, but about 2 inches above the top of the plug was that basal crook. It was well out of the plug. Strangest thing I'd ever seen. I told the other forester that was with me with Alabama Power Company, I said, you're getting all them, I don't want those. And we did some calling and researching and found out, I mean, I went to school at Auburn. We weren't taught shortleaf other than cut it down, plant, blah, blah. And so I had to do some research, but we ended up, we were about to cull all those, but we ended up using them, just planted them deep, got that crook under the ground line, and ended up making a fine stand. We didn't really put a lot of fire in these stands back early in them, but hopefully after we get that thinning in the next year or two, we'll start getting the fire back into those. Fast forward to 2001, the Forever Wild Land Trust that I'd spoke about earlier, they purchased around 35,000 acres of industrial timberland in northwest Alabama. It's actually upper coastal plain soils for the most part, but it was subjected to a timber reservation that was phased. That timber reservation ran over 19 years. And the first few years of that coming out of the reservation, we didn't really do a lot as far as reforestation or anything. We put in some early successional units and did some burning in those stands. But in 2005, the commissioner and division director decided that we needed to start doing some stuff up there, and that was both the wildlife division director and the state lands division. State lands is the lead management agency on the Forever Wild Land Trust, but we decided to jumpstart the process of getting the shortleaf restoration going with a state wildlife grant, and that grant's number T32. You can find all about it on our website at outdooralabama.com, and it's State Wildlife Grant T-3-2. I've got a copy up here if anybody wants to look at it at the break or anything. But that State Wildlife Grant, basically we tied some species of greatest conservation need back into what we hope to get as a shortleaf ecosystem, knowing that that was going to be long term. And that started on Freedom Hills and Lauderdale Wildlife Management areas is where we started at. The grant was for $300,000. The 3-year project that we had designed for it in the initial phase was to restore approximately 2,000 acres of an identified 20,000 acres to a shortleaf pine fire-dependent blue stem ecosystem. And that project has been carried on annually since then, using strictly Forever Wild stewardship funds by Galen Grider with state land sitting in the back, counterpart of mine in a sister division. Looking at some of the notes that I'd made on that SWIG grant, at the end of the 3 years, we had site prepped and planted 2,053 acres on Freedom Hills WMA, and we had site prepped 824 acres on the Lauderdale, site prepped and planted 824 on the Lauderdale WMA. The first year, 06-07 plantings, my boss was wanting to see some progress on that SWIG grant. We had initially designed it to use container seedlings. These are some pretty tough sites in northwest Alabama. But wanting to see some progress and deliverables on the grant, we got pushed into using some bare root stock. And we were able to get some bare root 1/0 from Tennessee, and we actually ended up getting some 2-year-old stock from Kentucky, and these are the 2-year-old stock that you can see here that these guys are planting And just knowing that site, like Bill had spoke about previously, I mean, you got to know your site and do your research on it. I was very reluctant to do this, and luckily only did 165 acres of it because we got less than 10% survival that year. And you know, it wasn't all bare rootstock. It was a pretty droughty year, that year that we planted, and you know, coupled with being in a harsh site, cut over site, with pretty well drained soils, it was tough on those seedlings. But before the 07-08 season, planting season came around, we further established a relationship with Wayne Bell at International Forestry Company. And he's been providing us container loblolly and container longleaf for a long time. We work with Wayne every year that we're going to have a need for any type of seedling, really, especially longleaf and shortleaf. We work with Wayne under a contract basis to ensure that we let him know in advance what we're going to need and that we end up getting the seedlings that we need to put in the ground. But just wanted to stress that point, you know, from his presentation the other day. He can't sell them to you if he don't know that you needed them. Basically just a closer up shot of that 2-aught nursery stock going in. You know, like I said, can't emphasize enough the use of quality planting stock, either, you know, bare root or container. I tend to prefer container myself for my sites. Rolling along, this is some shots of Freedom Hills Wildlife Management Area that are a little bit blurry, but I think you can tell what's going on. These sites, same typical chopper and Razor Pro treatment on these, planted. These were burned in January of 2014, and the pictures was taken in March of 2015. But we've accomplished that. SWIG grant was a shortleaf restoration, blue stem restoration project, and we've got you know, shortleaf out there. It was a little denser than this. We've had some of it top killed back that didn't come back. I think everybody's seeing that, but we've got a lot of good blue stem grasses out there, good legumes, forbs, just a good composite out there for wildlife. The next few slides that I'll go through, these are from Freedom Hills and Lauderdale WMAs both, and some of the folks in the room have been to some of these sites with me before and have you know, walked around and looked at it. These stands did not get fire in them as early as I would like to have got it in there. That stand there is probably 7 years old, and we got some good burning in January. We had some other burning earlier than that, but you can see where, you know, we got some pretty significant mortality back here. I'm going to be going back and looking at some of these different places to see if where that fire ran up some of these little minor ridges, if we are getting some sprouts off of it. But back in turkey season, I wasn't seeing a tremendous amount of it. Another site there, as I said, a lot of them had went a while without being burned, and fire had a lot of fuel to work in. But for our purposes, I know Galen probably don't want to hear this because this is on some of his property, but all this mix over here is what we're looking for. I mean, you've got several native grasses, several native lespedezas, you've got all multiple rubus species out there. I mean, it's just an excellent matrix out there for wildlife. This is some stuff off of Pea Ridge Road in Lauderdale County. Some of the guys in here that's been on this site will remember, but we had some arson fires. These taller trees you see are leaf tree loblolly. The timber reservation for some reason, we ended up getting 4 loblolly trees per acre left out there, and it's a constant source of in-seeding the loblolly, so we're going to have to start burning a lot more frequently than we do. But the area on the left up here, on the left-hand side of the road, that site there was an arson fire right before turkey season in 2011, and then it was fired again by arson 2014. The right-hand side of the road got its first burn back in January, but you can see the differences in height of the regeneration shortleaf coupled with how much brush is on this side, and that's already over to a nice grassy herbaceous understory. Of course, the shortleaf regen is lower in height, but still is out there and coming on. And this is some more, just a couple of different locations in the Shaw Holler region. It was burned in January 2015. Pictures are in 2015. We've still got plenty of shortleaf out there, and it's doing good. We're going to just try and, keep our fire regime in it and keep on making good wildlife habitat. Another picture there. Notice all the asters and broom sage, blue stem. There's a little bit of Indian grass mixed in. There's it's good stuff out there. You can see from some of the poplar that's coming back up from the fire. Hopefully we'll keep knocking it back in some of the subsequent fires that we have. But for us, being a wildlife agency, and I think I've seen some of the same thing all week. Everybody that's managing shortleaf has a completely different set of objectives. I mean, we want to grow timber. We want to grow shortleaf timber for the long term. But for the people that are paying our bills, that pay my check every week, they want game species, to hunt on. So we got to find that happy medium that everybody's been talking about, and we're just going to keep on working on it. Got a little time for any questions?